Okay, everybody, welcome. I think we're going to get started. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you will be able to hear me. We have an interesting topic to speak about today. Let me first mention, as we get closer to Pesach, there's a lot of special things happening this year during Pesach. One of the items that someone presented me with, I don't have it in front of me, but have cards that are being given out. Some people being asked to actually have a fifth cup, this one in honor of the Chatufin, the hostages. There's a way to do this. You don't really want to make an extra bracha, and you don't eat or drink anything after the afikomen, but if you have access to those cards with the information, basically doing that kind of together with the fourth cup, and there's a little something to say. I also have prepared, and I'll just show you this, a supplement to the Seder dealing with issues of the Gaza war and some of the type of kavanot, the things that we can be thinking about and talking about that connect to what's happening, both in terms of the war itself and the hostages. So I've sent this out to many people. If you did not receive this, it was attached to an email, but if you send me a request from your email, this is actually a 4-page pamphlet that's going to go in a lot of different shuls tomorrow or for Shabbat, and many people will get it that way. But if not, and you want a copy, and you can use it in conjunction with your Haggadah at the Seder, and it's a lot of talking points and things to say, connecting different aspects of the Seder with the current situation. So if you want to, at some point, not on the chat, but you want to send me an email or a WhatsApp, I will be happy to send you a copy of this. You can print it and you can use it at your Seder. Okay. Tonight, we're going to discuss this topic of miracles. There's a lot to say about miracles. The period of that we're dealing with in Pesach is filled with miracles. It extends over a long period of time. We have, issues of not only, we'll talk about the 10 plagues, but the mun that falls in the desert that feeds the people, the sneh, the burning bush, seems quite miraculous. There's kind of almost a steady succession of miracles. The Haggadah likes to talk about how many miracles there were at the sea. Was it 10, 50, 250? And it's really quite almost humorous that they're talking about proliferating all these different miracles as if what we had wasn't enough. But this is coming to the fore now because of the events of last Motzei Shabbat and Sunday, where, as we all know, we kind of lived with a certain fear that there was going to be this intense bombing from Iran. And as we've all learned since then, 331 missiles. I mentioned that in my article, that 331 is gematria for Baruch Hashem Balayla, blessed is God in the night. And that certainly was fulfilled this past Motzei Shabbat and early Sunday morning. And many, many people feel, of course, that this is an outright miracle. How is it possible that all of these different types of projectiles will be fired at Israel and not a single one would harm a Jew? And it's one of those kind of situations, as we'll talk about, where those who believe, believe, and those who don't. Because even though we might be tempted to say, how could you possibly deny that this is a miracle? There have been people that have come out, and yes, I know Yehudin is one of them, miracles that people have come out and said, well, Not necessarily. It could very well be that this was almost prearranged as a kind of secret deal between Iran and the US and Biden, perhaps including Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and saying that these won't be directed towards any actual targets to do either heavy damage or loss of life. Other people wanting to say that this was merely an attempt by Iran to show that look how we can set off myriad rockets, and at the same time, and just this is a fraction of what we could do if we wanted to and actually really cause damage. We could not only send 300 plus, but we could send 3,000 rockets, etc. So that debate goes on. The viral message by a physicist saying this defies all the laws of probability, of chance, that it had to be a miracle. It's not exactly 99% that did not damage, because there were some that did do some damage to one of the bases in the south. But and I think sparks a debate about miracles in general. So I want to talk about that in general and then talk about Pesach in particular. First of all, what is a miracle? A lot of people give a lot of different explanations, but I would say the simplest is a miracle is that which shows or reveals God. And that, of course, is subject to interpretation. Is sunset a miracle? Is birth of a child a miracle? And I could give you 100 different examples. Things that we do today and we have today 100 years ago would clearly be considered a miracle. Even things as simple as a ballpoint pen or a lighter. These are things that you go back far enough in time, people would say, well, that's obviously a miracle if you can produce fire out of a tiny little something you hold in the palm of your hand, etc. So it is subject to interpretation. So I would give some criteria in order to establish what a miracle is. First of all, it has to be an event that has some purpose. If a meteor falls to Earth, that's quite stunning, but it's not necessarily a miracle. But if it falls on the head of a robber as they're about to rob you, then you probably would say that is a miracle. It does not seem like a random event. So you have to take random out of the equation if you're going to call it a miracle. It would also have to be something very rare so that those who see it are stunned, as opposed to something that happens every day or on a regular basis that you would probably not consider that. You wouldn't stop in your tracks and say, I experienced a miracle today. It should be something that a human being cannot do. If the police come and stop the robber, even though that's something that obviously you're very happy about and maybe even comes at an unexpected time, but it's not necessarily in the realm of a miracle. Sometimes I think if the police were to come and stop a Walt driver careening down the sidewalk, that to me, I think would be a miracle. Unfortunately, it doesn't, because it rarely, if ever, happens. Then you would need some kind of documentation. So it would have to be something which you can prove one way or the other, either by some kind of physical evidence or by enough people seeing it so that you believe it must have happened. Now, if there is advance notification that this miracle is going to happen at a certain time in a certain place, that obviously would enhance the miracle. So what I want to do is to take, and by the way, let me add before we take a closer look at the Eser Makot, the 10 plagues, which some people call the 10 miracles, and think about whether those were indeed miraculous. I would want to say too that we are not a people that really depend upon miracles. They may happen, and we acknowledge them, but we don't live our life dependent on miracles, at least not outright miracles. Later on, we could say a few words about how miracles are more imperceptive or not easily seen. Let's take a look a little bit closer at the Eser Makot and think about whether these were indeed really miracles. By the way, we talk about people having some kind of communication message from God. We should know, A, this doesn't happen today, at least in a way that's in any way verifiable. And it didn't happen a lot in the Torah either. Interestingly enough, God appeared to the Avot, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, a total of 6 times. 3 times to Abraham, twice to Yitzchak, and once to Yaakov. So that wasn't going on a lot either. Otherwise, these were visions that came in dreams and were different from something that you would say, I really had a personal encounter with God. Let's take a look at the Eser Makot. The first one is blood. The water turns to blood. This appears to be very miraculous. It is indeed predicted in advance. Moshe tells Paro this is going to happen. It's something very rare. It basically never happened or happens. And it was also interesting and particularly effective because it attacked the primary god of Egypt. So it was something that was pretty earth-shaking when the Nile, which, again, the Egyptians worshipped, turns to blood. However, the magicians can do it too. They're also able to take water and turn it into blood. So as miraculous as it looks, Paro says essentially, my magicians can do it. So it's some kind of a trick because they're not miracle workers. So we go to the second of the Makot, and that is frogs. Now, frogs carries, in addition to being this plague of frogs that goes everywhere and makes life very difficult for everyone, including Paro. Moshe says to Paro, when would you like me to remove the frogs? And Paro says, tomorrow. And the commentaries say, why does he say tomorrow? You would think he'd want to get rid of them today. But Paro is thinking, yeah, Moshe's expecting, he might know why there is this infestation of frogs. Maybe he's like a biologist, he knows things. And so he's expecting that I'll say, get rid of them today. So I'll show him and I'll say, only get rid of them tomorrow. And Moshe says, okay, you choose tomorrow. That's what will happen. And indeed, they do die, not today, but tomorrow. It's impressive. It adds to this idea that it must be a miraculous thing. However, Paro's magicians can do that too. Torah says that they can also create frogs seemingly out of nowhere, yesh me'ayin. So that doesn't work. Comes the third plague of kinim, of lice, and a lot of parents here knows exactly what a plague that can be if you have children in schools. The magicians can't do it, but it's not predicted. So because it comes suddenly, it could very well be that Paro is thinking, well, Moshe knew there was going to be an outbreak of lice, and so he's kind of pretending as if he and God are creating it, but it was going to be there anyway, and he knew about it in advance. Now, this is a trick that Paro himself does. Paro goes to bathe in the Nile every morning, essentially because he wants to project himself as a god as well, so he can't do his bathroom needs in a place that will show him to be mortal. So he goes to the river where that's hidden, and he can do what he does there. But he sees, the Nile is really the lifeblood of the Egyptian economy. So if the Nile is rising, so Paro sees that first, and he issues a proclamation. I, the great God Pharaoh, I am ordering the Nile to rise. And everybody thinks, wow, Pharaoh has the power to raise the Nile. And then our economy grows. Obviously it helps the crops, etc., and makes Pharaoh look very good and makes him look omniscient. And then if he says he sees the Nile is descending and receding, he says, I am angry with the people of Egypt for things you have done. I, the great Pharaoh, am going to order the Nile to recede. And so that's a trick that he thinks, well, Moshe can do the same thing when something doesn't have any advance warning. Moshe maybe knew about it because of some knowledge he had of, we'll see with other examples, in this case, that the lice were coming out, and he just announced it in advance, kind of like, how would I do? Comes the wild beasts, and that is predicted it's going to happen, but it could be about the arov, the mixture of wild beasts, that's not so impressive, because Chazal talk a lot about the fact that Moshe and possibly Aaron as well, they control the animal kingdom, because according to the Midrash, Paro has lions, maybe even tigers. I'm not sure about bears, but lions and tigers that are in the palace. And when he tells them to attack, Moshe and Aaron, instead of attacking, they come in and lick their hands, and they are completely docile in front of them. So they figure Moshe and Aaron, they must have this ability to control the animals. So they just cause some of these animals to go and attack us. So that doesn't impress them either. And then comes the cattle disease. Now, this is predicted, and this is pretty miraculous, it seems, because the cattle of the Egyptians are dying, but the cattle of the Israelites, the Ivrim, nothing happens to them. So you would think that they would sit up and say, how could this be? This can't occur rationally, logically, normally. How is it that their animals are okay and ours aren't? But there's a story that goes along with this. Because at some point, Paro is looking out the window and he sees an Egyptian with an animal, and the animal, nothing happens to it. And Paro says, well, apparently this God is not foolproof if there's an Egyptian animal that's not dying. What's the story behind the story? There was, in all these years, Chazal say, no illicit liaison between a member of Bnei Israel and the Egyptians, with one exception. The Egyptian that Moshe killed was having an affair, you might say, with the wife of Datan. We know about Datan and Aviram, and we know that Moshe killed the Egyptian because Datan came back from the field. He came back early. He saw his wife with the Egyptian, and probably because it was not even allowed for an Egyptian to have any relationship with a member of the Hebrews. So he didn't want any witnesses, and he started to beat and try to kill Datan. Moshe sees this happening, and he saves Datan's life, even though later Datan will actually be an adversary for him. And although he kills the Egyptian, he had already impregnated her Datan's wife. She bore a child, and that child was the one who was walking with the animal. So according to the Egyptians, who go by patrilineal descent, so they identify this child as an Egyptian. But we would say, no, his mother was Jewish, Hebrew, if you will, and so that animal is not being affected. So even though there was that one very bizarre case, nevertheless, Paro was enough for Paro to say, well, if there's even one Egyptian animal that's unharmed, so it's the Jewish God is not infallible, and I don't have to believe in it. I don't have to accept it. So we go to 6, to the shchid, the boils. Here too, unpredicted. So it's an out for Paro to say, well, Moshe, maybe he's a dermatologist, and he saw coming this makkah, this plague of the boils. The 7th plague is barad, the hail. This is kind of a direct attack on Horus, the Egyptian god of the sky. And this is really something which seems so miraculous. It's predicted exactly. They draw a line on the wall. And Moshe says when the sun hits that line, then all hell is going to break loose. And this hail is going to come down. It's something, as the Torah says, nothing the likes of which you have ever seen before. It is unique and unpredictable. The ice contains within it fire. So it's a mixture of these two elements of fire and water, or cold and heat. It destroys all the vegetation, and it's very impressive. And yet the Paro does not accept that this is a miracle that can only come from God. There must be a God who controls everything in the world, because, as the pasuk tells us, the wheat and the spelt is unaffected. The other crops are destroyed by the hail, by the barad, but not the wheat and the spelt. It's enough for Paro to say, once again, your God is not infallible, powerful, but I have powerful gods too. So who's to say yours is more powerful than mine? Comes next, the 8th makkah, the locusts. They destroy all the wheat and the spelt that was left. It's been predicted that they'll come, so this makes it even more miraculous. And essentially, this is destroying all the food sources of the Egyptians. The fish destroyed in the blood, the cattle and the cattle disease, now the vegetation, first in the hail, and now in the locusts. You would think it would bring Paro to his knees to say, all right, I must acknowledge these are miracles that only a God could do, and my God can't do them. However, there is still an out, because he says, I still have one God left. Ru'u, he says, ki ra neged panechem. There's different meanings for this, but one of the plain meanings is, as we know, if you like crossword puzzles, Ra, R-A, is the name of an Egyptian god, the god of the sun. And Paro says, how powerful could your God be? I still have mine, the sun, and that's all powerful. So I choose not to believe. And so what happens in the next plague? What comes next? Darkness, and a direct attack on this sun god, blotting out the sun for 3 days. Well, Paro is already on the verge of believing, and he's going to more or less, but because, again, this darkness comes unpredicted without anybody saying this is going to happen. Again, maybe Moshe, as a meteorologist, maybe he knew it was coming. Comes the 10th plague, Makat Bechorot, and this, of course, is truly unbelievable that it's predicted that it's going to happen at midnight. Paro goes to sleep, and now it seems when he wakes up and finds what's happened in the death of the firstborn, including his own son and prince, maybe several of them actually, because he had different wives. He says, pray for me. He starts to believe. And it seems like finally Moshe has won the day. Paro's going to acknowledge. And by the way, what's the whole point of this exercise? Paro is the leader of the known world. If he's able to stand up and say, there is a God, and that God is all powerful, and controls all the elements and supersedes any other so-called God, that will advance God's wish that the world will be filled with a knowledge of God and a belief in God. That's why all this is happening. Paro seems like he's getting the message. He lets the people go. They travel for 3 days, but then something happens. They reach a place 3 days out of Egypt called Baal Tzefon, which literally means the God of the North. And there is an idol there, which normally would be used kind of a marker that people should not go past it. And Paro learns from his servants, from his scouts, they have stopped at Baal Tzefon. He says, do you mean my idol of the North is still existing? That it hasn't been destroyed? Well, he says, it looks like God, this is all a trick, that God is not all powerful. And that's when he orders his army to advance and to attack, ultimately, the people. So he never does get it. Obviously, we know what happens at the Red Sea. We know that his navy, essentially his military will go down to the depths and be destroyed, and Egypt will cease to be a world power from then on. He never really quite gets it. But ultimately, the whole message of this is that there always has to be an escape clause as some way of being able to say and declare, I believe or I do not believe. Paro always was given that freedom of choice. And all of us have the same freedom of choice. It's what essentially makes us different than the animals. So whatever occurs cannot and should not occur in such a way that we are robbed of our freedom of choice, so that we say, I believe in God because I have no other choice. How can I not believe in God when I've seen something like this? Well, then your belief is not really all that authentic. It's something you chose to do because you really were bound by it. And therefore, every quote unquote nace has to be accompanied by an escape clause that allows you to say, maybe it's not a miracle. Therefore, nace is connected to the word nisayon. It's the test that you're being given. Will you believe or won't you believe? It's your choice. If you want to say that these rockets and this bombardment failed to harm us because God was protecting us, because there is a God, and God was vigilant to make sure we were unharmed, then great, you've declared your emunah. But if you want to say, no, it was either coincidence, or they never meant for the rockets to hurt anybody, or it was some kind of a deal that they made with the United States, with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, with Iraq, etc. That's your choice. It's up to you to make the decision, and it can't be any other way. So when we experience any miracle, it can be an outright miracle like this. It can be the birth of a child. It can be the fact that the Jewish people have survived all these centuries against all these civilizations that wanted to wipe us out. The fact that we are here in Israel and reclaim the land, all the things that one person will say, definitely a miracle, whereas others would say, not necessarily. I can explain it in rational ways too. 6-Day War, yeah, I realize a lot of people call it a miracle, but maybe somebody else will say, we had the element of surprise, we had better army, where our Air Force was superior, etc., etc. It always has to be that way. Miracles, or what some people would call miracles and others would call perhaps good fortune, they're always subject to our freedom of choice. And this is no exception. So if you believe, then you believe. And you are part of that faith community that says, I know everything comes from Hashem. Nothing is mikra, as we say. We rearrange the letters of mikra, random by accident, to read Rak Me Hashem, that everything comes from God. And that has to be your choice, because that's the test, the nisayon that each of us have. We hope that we will continue to pass that test, and that if we are deserving, if we are zocha, that these miracles will continue. And we need, certainly, whether they're outright or whether they're hidden miracles, whether they're perceptible, imperceptible, that Hashem will continue to perform these miracles for us, that we should earn them and deserve them. And we'll see an end to this war in our favor, the release of the hostages, Bezrat Hashem, and we will go on stronger than ever here in Medinat, in Eretz Yisrael. So I want to end with a tefillah and wish everybody then a Chag Sameach, and hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Mishaberach Abateinu Avraham Yitzchak V'Yakov V'Yavarech Et Chaylei Tzva Haganah Yisrael Haomdim Al Mishmar Tzeinu Borei Eloheinu Yitein Adonai Toivenu Akamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifneihem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmarei Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah Mikol Negu Machala V'Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha B'Chol Masei Dehem Yadber Soneinu Taktihem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua V'Ter Nitzachon V'Kuyam B'Hem HaKatuv Ki Adonai Elohechem Olechem Lachem Lilachem Lachem Imay Bechem Lo She'edchem V'Nomar Amen. And a prayer for the hostages. Mishaberach Abateinu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Yosef Moshe Aaron David Ushlomo V'Yivarach V'Yishmor V'Yinsor Achenu Beit Yisrael Hashvuyim V'Avur Shana Mitpalim V'Avuram HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Yishmoreim Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah Mikol Negu Machala Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha V'Chol Masei Dehem Yotziei Michoshech B'Tzal Mavet Yishivim Meira L'chek Mishpachotehem V'Nomar Amen. Everybody have a wonderful Chag. It should be safe, and with God's help, we shall meet again in 2 weeks, same time, same place. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Thanks for tuning in.